it's not on. Can you hear me? All right. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So I had a kind of scary flashback on Friday morning. A group of folks from this parish, Andrew Hartman and Jim Passard and Sarah Passard with her camera, came to my house and took down this tree in my front garden. I was bummed about the tree coming down, but I was glad that it got a new life and a new place to hang out here with us. The neighbors were complaining it was getting too big, that kind of thing. But the flashback that I had, the scary negative flashback, was that it seems like every year in my childhood growing up, the biggest fight our family ever had was putting the Christmas tree up. Does anyone else have this experience where it's like we're arguing about where the extension cord is, we're mad about the type of needles that we got, or the base of the tree doesn't work, and apparently this took all day to get up, and we owe Barry Parker a round of applause for getting it up. But isn't it, it looks great. But our readings today, we heard from the scribe of the prophet, maybe Jeremiah, we don't know, Baruch. So I'm going to talk about Baruch. I'm also going to talk about the guy we saw in the gospel. Does anyone remember who was in today's gospel? Anybody? John the Baptist was in today's gospel. So you just heard me read about a voice crying in the wilderness. That was John the Baptist quoting Isaiah. So we got Baruch, we got John the Baptist. And what's on the cover of your bulletin? And Stephen mentioned it. Does anyone know what's going on today, who we're celebrating? St. Nicholas. Okay, so we've got three interesting fellows. Baruch, John the Baptist, and St. Nicholas. Can you all guess what they have in common? Anybody know what all three of those folks have in common? They're separated by hundreds of years. Any ideas? Come on. There's no wrong answers. Give it a guess. Well, they are all men. Well, I said earlier that they all have beards. We think. We don't know for sure. But no, there's actually more than that to these guys that they share. And not only that we're talking about them at Christ Church today, but here's what I came up with. Baruch, who was the scribe to maybe this guy Jeremiah, we don't know, but he had this prophetic vision or idea. And a lot of the prophets, they're kind of in the middle of our Bible. There's the Torah section, and there's this middle section, then there's the Gospels. The middle section is really full of voices that are both energizing and criticizing. They have visions of hope and possibility, but they're also like, the world is really messed up. Things are not good. That's sort of the prophet's job, to both get you excited about a vision of possibility and sort of say, look, you're falling short. So Baruch, the scribe of somebody, we're not really sure. He's actually in the Apocrypha, so he's not exactly, so in some Bibles you won't even be able to find him, but he's an interesting voice. And one of the things I think all three of our fellows have in common is that they thought deeply about their faith. And when they thought deeply about their faith, it wasn't just them and God. It was how they and their community reflected God's vision and God's purpose. So all three, Baruch, John the Baptist, and St. Nicholas, cared about their faith, and they also knew that their faith had something to do with their community and whether their community was in alignment with what God's purposes and desires are for people. So they worked at it. They spoke up about it. So thank you, Baruch, for that. But John the Baptist, similarly, this voice in the wilderness, he had a concept of the divine, that God wanted something different than what was going on in Roman-occupied Palestine. We kind of say he might have been the cousin of Jesus, and there's a lot of stories about that, and you'll see some of that in the pageant maybe. But John the Baptist was deeply serious about his faith, but he knew it wasn't about just him and God. He was out there telling folks, and folks were hearing his message, and they were drawn to it because they knew that it had a communal, a collective something. It mattered. St. Nicholas. Now, what was St. Nicholas before he was a saint? Does anyone know? He was a priest. Very good. What else was he? He was a bishop. He became a bishop. Now, the story of this guy, St. Nicholas, goes to around the 270 to 300 period. So we're talking about 200 and some years after Jesus, but not as recent as St. Francis, which we heard about a while ago. St. Nicholas came about in the 270 to 3 something, and we believe that he, when he was born into a wealthy family, the legend goes, very rich family, but his mom and his dad both died when he was a kid from a pandemic. Kind of sad, but relatable in a way to where we are, sadly. I thought pandemics were historical and never again, but here we are. So St. Nicholas, who we will call now Bishop Nicholas of Myra, which is in the world sort of known as Turkey, where we think of Turkey, he inherited all this money, but he decided, because he believed deeply about his faith, remember I said he had that in common with John the Baptist and Baruch, cared about his faith. He heard that when Jesus says in the gospel, sell everything you have and give it away, he's like, I'm going to do that. So he gave away all of his inheritance early on. I think it set him up well for life in the church, because what else was he going to do? But Nicholas ended up becoming a bishop, a priest first, then a bishop, in this space of Turkey in the 300s. He ended up going to the Council of Nicaea, which is where we get the Nicene Creed from. So he was there. He was kind of an early patristic, as they say, early church father or mother. He was an early church father, had a big influence on that. But the other thing that happened around him, and I think is the same with Baruch and the same with St. John the Baptist, was that they saw the world and they said, something's not right. They had a deep faith, but their faith led them to say, you know what? There's a lot of wrong going on in this world, and we ought to do something about it. All three of them felt that in different ways. And their response to it, pretty much all across, was generosity. They knew they couldn't fix it, but they thought out of their abundance, out of their having a lot, they could do more. And what happened with the great Bishop Nicholas, was that he had compassion for those who were suffering. And there's a story, it is the story that if you Google Nicholas, you'll read about it. It's the story of a poor family and 3 girls, and this guy has these 3 daughters, and in that time, talk about injustice, in order for those girls to get married, they had to have a dowry. So the family had to, get a bunch of money and say, hey, will you marry my daughter? Which sounds kind of horrible. Can you believe that? Has anyone ever heard of a dowry before? Anyway, this dad could not do it, didn't have the money. And his daughters and his family were going to be pretty much in a bad place if nothing happened. So, Bishop Nicholas came by on his horse and threw some gold in their window. And the next day, soon after that, the first daughter got married off. A couple years later, another gold set of coins falls in the window, and it's for the second daughter. The third time, the dad sort of like, what's going on with this gold coin stuff? I'm going to hide, and finds out it was the bishop. And the bishop, Bishop Nicholas, says to him, it's better to give in secret. And that wasn't the only thing that Nicholas did. In fact, he became well known for his compassion for the poor. He spent time in jail because of his faith, so he suffered in the world for his conscience. And he did a lot in the world that had a ripple effect in such a way that he became like a patron saint to people on boats. Like all over the world, there's probably not, it may be that St. Nicholas, there are more St. Nicholas churches than any other saint, because he'd become known as sort of the patron of children in distress. He became a patron to sailors on the sea, and he ended up being really concerned with those who were suffering and did something about it. And that's why we remember him. Do you know who today, kind of is like a descendant of this St. Nicholas? Do you know who that would be? It's coming, around Christmas time. Santa Claus, exactly. So whenever we see Santa Claus, we should try to kind of remember that this was a guy who cared about his faith, saw that the world wasn't quite right, and decided that the way to deal with it was to respond with generosity. And we can learn those lessons from all all different. Do you know anybody here know what a saint is anyway? What's a saint? Vivian, do you know? Right, a person that does good for other people and that the church remembers and celebrates. So that's why we remember St. Nicholas, that's why we remember St. Francis and St. Clare, and why it's important for us to celebrate him today. And look who's in the back of the room right here. He's shown up, huh? Now, if you're a kid and you have, if you're a kid and you want to come to the middle of the aisle, you want to come and get a piece of candy from the great bishop here. What do you got in there? You want to show us? You got gold coins? All right. Let's see. Can I see? Oh, I can't. Oh. All right. Well, if you're a little one and you are wanting a coin, a chocolate coin or a crozier, so our candy canes are in the same shape as a bishop's crozier. Can you show them the crozier you have? Here, I'll show it to them. Look. So this is what a bishop would traditionally carry around. Do you know why they carry these around? Anybody? Why do we carry these? Does it look like anything particular to you? Yeah? It is. It's about, so one of the titles or names for bishops or their role is to be like a shepherd to people. So they carry these around to be reminiscent of the shepherd role. And our candy canes are the same shape. All right. Let's give the Bishop of Myra a big round of applause. Thank you. Oh, I get a coin too. There's your crozier. All right. Well, let's remember the three things that the bishop has in common with St. John the Baptist and Baruch. They cared about their faith. They responded and saw injustice in the world with generosity. Now, St. John the Baptist gave his head on a platter, but I don't expect that from you. God bless you. Thank you all.